The handprint remains on the stone long after the breath that made it has vanished. A palm once pressed against a cave wall, fingers spread, skin warm, body alive in the dimness. Around it, pigment drifted through the air like red smoke. Someone leaned close enough to feel the cold rock near the wrist, then blew colour from the mouth, leaving a ghostly outline where flesh had blocked the spray. The person stepped away. The hand disappeared into darkness. The mark stayed. What did that person say after making it? Did others gather close to look? Did someone name the animal shapes on the wall? The dangerous bend in the river, the trail across the plain, the dead remembered in the firelight. Did a voice explain why the hand mattered? Why this place belonged not only to one person, but to a group with memory? No answer comes back. The cave keeps the shape of the hand, but not the sound of the voice. It preserves the mineral stain, but not the first word that may have followed it. That is the strange problem at the heart of human origins. Bones can survive, stone tools can survive, charcoal can survive for tens of thousands of years, teeth can outlast whole landscapes. Ancient DNA can hide in a fragment of bone smaller than a coin and reveal vanished branches of the human family. But speech disappears almost instantly. A word exists as a vibration passing through air. It is born in the throat, shaped by the tongue, lips, jaw, breath, and brain, received by ears, interpreted by minds, and then it is gone. The most powerful tool humans ever developed leaves almost nothing behind. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because the story of the first human words is not a neat tale of one sudden invention. It is not a moment when a silent creature opens its mouth and language appears complete. It is a much older, slower, stranger story, spread across millions of years, across forests and savannas, glaciers and islands, caves and river valleys, bodies and brains, gestures and cries, images and signs. It is the story of how meaning gathered itself inside living communities long before anyone could write it down. To look for the beginning of language, one must begin with absence. There are no recordings from the Ice Age, no preserved sentence from the first Homo sapiens, no fossilized lullaby, no engraved grammar, no carved dictionary at the mouth of a cave. The oldest writing known from the ancient world appears only a few thousand years ago, when cities, states, temples, taxes, and trade begin demanding permanent systems of record. But by then language is already ancient. Writing is not the birth of speech. It is a late shadow cast by something far older. Long before writing, humans cross deserts, follow animals, gather plants, make fire, shape tools, carry ornaments, mix pigments, and enter caves where walls become surfaces of memory. They cooperate in ways that require attention to what others know, want, fear, remember, and intend. They pass on techniques too precise to reinvent every generation by accident. They teach the young in protective communities. They recognize tracks, seasons, kin, dangers, obligations, and stories. What survives in the record suggests that human life is already thick with shared meaning long before the first written sign appears. Yet shared meaning is not the same thing as language in the modern sense. Birds call warnings. Chimpanzees gesture, groom, threaten, reconcile, and use sounds in socially meaningful ways. Whales sing. Elephants rumble across distance. Many living creatures communicate with sophistication, and some do so in ways that still unsettle older ideas about human uniqueness. But human language carries a different weight. It can refer to things not present. It can describe yesterday and tomorrow, the dead and the unborn, the visible and the imagined. It can build myths, plans, warnings, jokes, promises, maps, prayers, and explanations. It can let one mind place a world inside another. The mystery is not simply when sound began. Sound is ancient, nor is it merely when gestures began, because gesture is older still. The deeper question is when communication crossed a threshold and became something capable of carrying open-ended thought. When did signals become sentences? When did calls become stories? When did a warning become a memory of a hunt, a teaching about a valley, a belief about an ancestor, or a plan for a journey not yet taken? Scholars still debate where that threshold lies, because it may not have been a sharp line at all. It may have been a long slope, climbed by many human ancestors in different ways. The evidence remains incomplete because language hides inside several kinds of traces at once. It hides in anatomy, breathing, hearing, and the fine timing of lips and tongue. It hides in the brain, in networks that link memory, movement, social prediction, sound, and meaning. It hides in hands, because before words can be spoken, meanings can be pointed, shaped, mimed, passed, and corrected. It hides in tools, because complex tool-making can reveal sequences learned through observation and instruction. It hides in pigments and symbols, because images may show that minds are not only seeing the world, but representing it. There is a temptation to ask for the first word as if the past might eventually surrender it. Perhaps it was a name for water, a cry for danger, a call to a loved one, a sound for fire, a greeting, a word for meat, sky, stone, mother, or come here. Such guesses are human, but they are not evidence. The first word, if there was ever a single first word, is lost beyond recovery. It vanished the moment it was spoken. Even the idea of one first word may be misleading, because language likely emerged from networks of sound, gesture, expression, rhythm, and shared expectation rather than a solitary invention. At the entrance of this story stands the cave wall, the handprint, the animal shape, the line, the sign, the stain of pigment. These are not speech, and no careful account should pretend they are. A painting is not a sentence. A mark is not a grammar. A carved sign is not the same as a spoken word passed between living mouths. But they matter because they show that humans before writing are not trapped in the immediate present. They can make marks that outlast the body. They can place meaning outside themselves. They can return to a surface and find something still waiting there. The people who made those marks were not mute shadows. They lived in communities full of breath, movement, alarm, affection, teaching, memory, and attention. They likely spoke in ways that would be utterly lost to us, in languages with sounds we cannot reconstruct, and meaning shaped by worlds that no longer exist. Their rivers have shifted, their coastlines have drowned, their animals have vanished or retreated, their camps have turned to dust, their words have left no direct trace. Yet the need for words seems to press outward from everything they made. The mystery of the first human words, then, is not a locked door with a single key. It is a landscape in fog. Some shapes are firm enough to walk toward, others recede as one approaches. No single explanation fully accounts for how language began, but the surviving evidence points to a deep history far older than writing, older than cities, older than agriculture, and perhaps older than our species in some of its foundations. The hand on the cave wall does not speak, but it tells us where to listen. Long before a human hand leaves pigment on stone, long before a hunter points across a valley, long before a voice can name a river that has not yet been reached, the roots of meaning lie hidden in bodies that are not yet human. They move through forests, climb branches, listen for one another in leaves, and live in social worlds where silence is rarely empty. The ancestors of humans do not begin as isolated minds suddenly gifted with speech. They begin as primates already watching, calling, touching, warning, inviting, threatening, comforting, and negotiating their place among others. Language, in its later human form, may be unique, but it does not rise from nothing. It grows from older ground. To understand why the first human words are so difficult to locate, it helps to step back beyond humans entirely. Modern apes are not living fossils, and they are not simple models of our ancestors. Bonobos today have their own long evolutionary history, shaped by their forests, their bodies, and their social lives. Chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and humans have each changed in different ways since their lines divided. Still, when modern apes show capacities that resemble fragments of human communication, they offer clues about what may already have existed before the human lineage became separate. Not complete language, not grammar in the full human sense, but ingredients, flexible signals, social awareness, meaningful combinations, and an ability to treat calls not merely as noises but as parts of living relationships. Bonobos are especially intriguing because their social lives are rich, fluid, and full of subtle negotiation. They live in communities where bonds, alliances, tension, reconciliation, and movement through the forest all matter. A single call may be useful, but social life often demands more than one simple signal. An individual may need to indicate excitement, uncertainty, location, desire, alarm, or a change in group movement. Recent research has drawn attention to the way bonobos combine calls in ways that may change or refine meaning. This does not mean bonobos are speaking in sentences. It does not mean they have hidden human language in the trees, but it does suggest that the ability to build meaning from combinations may not be entirely new in humans. That point matters. For a long time, one of the great dividing lines between humans and other animals was thought to be the open-ended power of language, the ability to combine small units into larger meanings. Human words can be rearranged endlessly. A few sounds can become names, actions, qualities, memories, warnings, questions, and stories. Bonobo call combinations are vastly more limited, and scholars still debate how far the comparison can be taken. Yet the fact that combinations exist at all complicates the older picture. It suggests that some distant ancestor of humans and other apes may already have possessed communication systems more flexible than simple reflex cries. The time frame is immense. Depending on which branches of the ape family are being considered, some routes of complex social communication may reach back many millions of years, perhaps within the broad span of 7 to 13 million years before the present. The most direct comparison for humans, chimpanzees, and bonobos points closer to the last common ancestor of those lineages, often placed around 6 to 7 million years ago. But the deeper primate inheritance is older than that. Long before the human face becomes fully human, before hand-shaped stone tools with regular design, before breath is controlled for flowing speech, primates are already using sound and body movement to manage social life. In those ancient forests, communication is not decoration. It is survival. A call can draw attention to danger. A gesture can reduce conflict. A touch can restore calm. A posture can prevent a fight before it begins. A sound can keep a group together when leaves and distance hide bodies from sight. For animals living in groups, the world is not made only of trees, fruit, predators, weather, and sleep. It is also made of relationships. Who is near? Who is tense? Who has food? Who is afraid? Who will follow? Who will resist? The more complicated social life becomes, the more pressure there is to send and read signals accurately. This is one of the quiet surprises in the language story before language becomes a system for describing the world. It may be deeply tied to the problem of living with others. Human speech can explain the stars and remember the dead, but its older roots may lie in the need to coordinate bodies in space, to share attention, to manage emotion, and to predict what another individual may do. A creature that can sense what others know or intend has an advantage. A creature that can influence these others with voice, face, hand, posture, and timing has another. The first words, far in the future, may inherit this social foundation. No single ape call is a fossil of speech. It would be misleading to imagine ancient hominins simply moving from bonobo-like combinations to human sentences in a straight line. Evolution is never that tidy. Traits appear, disappear, shift function, and become entangled with new pressures. The evidence remains incomplete, and modern ape behavior cannot be projected backward without caution. Still, it gives the past a living edge. It reminds us that before there is grammar, there is attention. Before there are stories, there are signals. Before there are names for distant things, there are calls that matter because someone else hears them and responds. The first human words may therefore belong to a much larger history of meaning. They are not the absolute beginning of communication, but a transformation of it. Something old is being reshaped. Vocal control becomes finer. Memory becomes deeper. Social imagination becomes wider. Hands become more precise. Faces become more expressive. Groups begin to rely more heavily on shared knowledge passed from one generation to another. Eventually, somewhere along the long path, signals stop being tied only to immediate emotion or action. They begin to carry ideas that can be moved around, recombined, and stored inside other minds. That is why the bonobo clue is powerful, even though it is modest. It does not solve the origin of language. It does not reveal the first word. It does not tell us what the earliest human ancestors sounded like. But it weakens the idea that language appeared as a sudden miracle in a silent animal. Instead, it suggests a long inheritance of vocal and social capacities, waiting to be changed by new bodies, new brains, new landscapes, and new ways of living. The path to human speech may begin not with a single word, but with a forest full of calls, gestures, glances, and responses, each one small, each one temporary, each one vanishing into air. The cave handprint from the later human world still waits far ahead, tens of thousands of years in the future. But the deeper story has already begun. It begins before art, before tools of great complexity, before Homo sapiens, before Neanderthals, before Denisovans, before the first known campfires. It begins with living creatures who must make themselves understood well enough to remain together. Their signals do not yet become myths. They do not paint memory on stone, but in their calls, in their combinations, in the fragile exchange between one body and another. There is already a faint outline of the problem that will one day become language. The forest does not preserve a brain. It preserves no thought, no intention, no moment when one creature decides to make another understand. But inside living primates, the ancient problem of communication leaves another kind of clue, not in the sound itself, but in the wiring that helps sound, gesture, attention, and action become connected. If the bonobo clue brings the story into the social world of calls and combinations, the chimpanzee clue moves deeper, beneath the skull, into the pale architecture of white matter, where long bundles of nerve fibers link distant regions of the brain into working circuits. There, the search for language before history becomes less like listening for a lost voice, and more like tracing a road system whose oldest roots may have existed before humans took their first separate path. One of the most important of these roots is called the arcuate fasciculus. In modern humans, it is strongly associated with language, especially with the linking of regions that process sounds, meanings, and speech-related movement. It is often described as part of the network connecting areas traditionally associated with comprehension and production, though the real human language system is more distributed and complex than old textbook diagrams suggest. Still, the arcuate fasciculus matters because it is one of the great bridges of the speaking brain. It helps make possible the rapid transformation of heard sound into meaningful structure and intended speech into controlled movement. When humans speak fluently, they are not merely pushing air through the throat, they are coordinating memory, prediction, hearing, motor planning, social intention, and breath with astonishing speed. The road between these regions has to be fast, stable, and deeply practiced. For a long time, this kind of wiring seemed to widen the gap between humans and other apes. In humans, the arcuate fasciculus is larger and often shows a leftward pattern at the population level, matching the strong role the left hemisphere plays in many aspects of language. Non-human apes do not show human language, and so it was tempting to imagine that the relevant neural machinery had been radically rebuilt only after the human line separated. But the evidence is more subtle than that. Modern chimpanzees also have an arcuate fasciculus. It is not simply a human invention. It does not look exactly like the human version, and it does not produce human language. Yet its variation among individuals appears to be tied to how chimpanzees communicate with both voice and gesture. That detail is crucial. Recent work examining chimpanzee brain anatomy has found that individual differences in the arcuate fasciculus relate to communicative behavior, including both manual gestures and special attention-getting sounds made under voluntary control of the mouth and face. The study does not say chimpanzees possess language. It does not erase the immense distance between ape communication and human grammar. But it does suggest that the same broad neural route may have supported both vocal and gestural communication in the last common ancestor of chimpanzees and humans, around 6 to 7 million years ago. If true, then the foundation from which language later grew was already mixed. It was not purely hand or purely voice. It was a system in which movement, sound, and social attention were already intertwined. The lesser-known part of this story is almost oddly intimate. Some chimpanzees produce attention-getting sounds that are not simply automatic cries. They may make breathy lip sounds, kiss-like noises, raspberries, or modified food grunts in social contexts. These sounds can be used to attract attention, especially when another individual is not looking. They are not words, but they are also not meaningless bursts. They involve a degree of voluntary control over the lips, mouth, and face, which is precisely the kind of control that matters when thinking about the remote ancestry of speech. Some evidence suggests such behaviors can be socially learned and may even run in family lines. That does not make them language, but it makes them interesting. a creature that can intentionally make a sound to change another creature's attention, is already standing near one of the old doorways through which language later passes. Manual gestures add another layer. Great apes use their hands and arms in flexible, socially directed ways. A gesture can request, invite, threaten, interrupt, or draw attention. It often depends on whether the receiver is watching. If the receiver does not respond, the signaler may repeat, modify, or intensify the gesture. That kind of adjustment is important because it shows sensitivity to the other mind, or at least to the other body as an attentive partner. Human communication still depends on this. Even spoken language is surrounded by gesture pointing, nodding, facial expression, posture, rhythm, gaze. Words do not replace the body. They ride upon it. The debate over whether language began first in gesture or voice has lasted for generations, and scholars still debate the balance. Gesture-first models argue that hands gave early hominins a more controllable and visible medium before speech became dominant. Vocal-first models point to the deep emotional and social power of sound, especially when bodies are hidden by distance, darkness, or vegetation. Other views see no need for a single beginning. The chimpanzee brain evidence gently supports that third possibility. Perhaps the roots of language were never divided cleanly. Perhaps early communication grew from a shared system linking the mouth, the hands, the ears, the eyes, and the social brain. Speech, in this view, does not defeat gesture. It gathers gesture's flexibility and sound's reach into a new human form. The caution is just as important as the excitement. Modern chimpanzees are not human ancestors frozen in time. They are our evolutionary cousins, with their own adaptations and their own history. Their brains cannot be treated as museum specimens from 6 million years ago. And brain wiring, even when mapped with powerful modern techniques, does not reveal what an extinct ancestor could say. It cannot give us a vocabulary. It cannot tell us whether a hominin had names, tense, metaphor, or stories. The evidence remains incomplete, and the path from neural track to spoken language is long. But shared brain behavior patterns in humans and chimpanzees can point toward older capacities that may have existed before the split. This makes the first human words seem less like sparks from nowhere and more like fire catching in prepared material. The fuel is ancient social life. The dry grass is attention, gesture, emotion, and sound. The hidden root system is neural connectivity linking perception and action. When later hominins begin to walk upright, free the hands for new tasks, make tools with growing skill, expand across changing landscapes, and depend more deeply on cooperation. Those older circuits are not abandoned. They are recruited, stretched, reorganized, and intensified. Evolution rarely builds by wiping the slate clean. It modifies what is already there. Somewhere along that line, the balance changes. The mouth becomes more precise. Breath becomes more controlled. The brain becomes larger and more interconnected. The hand becomes not only a tool-making instrument, but a partner of meaning. Communication begins to carry more than immediate emotion. It starts to hold sequences, roles, objects, locations, memories, and intentions. Yet beneath the later richness of human speech, one can still imagine an older primate grammar of attention. Look here. Come closer. Stay back. Follow me. I fear. I know that you are there. The first written records will come unimaginably late. The painted caves will come late as well. Even the earliest confident traces of Homo sapiens lie far in the future from the last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees. but the road toward language is already faintly visible in the brain's own roads, not as words, not as sentences, not yet as stories whispered beside a fire, only as a possibility that the circuits for voice and hand, sound and movement, attention and social intention were already braided together millions of years before any human could ask where language came from. A brain may carry old roads for communication, but roads alone do not make speech. To speak as humans speak, the whole body has to join the work. Breath must be released in controlled streams instead of simple bursts. The tongue must move with extraordinary precision inside the mouth. The lips must close, open, round, press, and release at the right instant. The jaw must shift without breaking the rhythm. The ears must hear tiny differences in sound, and the brain must treat those differences as meaningful. The face must turn toward another face, the eyes must follow attention, and the hands must continue to shape meaning in the air. Human language is often imagined as a gift of the mind, but it is also a discipline of flesh. The body of a speaker is an instrument built from older parts. None of those parts evolved only for language. The lungs first serve breathing, the tongue serves eating, the lips serve feeding and expression. The larynx protects the airway and produces sound. The ears detect danger, distance, movement, and social signals. The hands grasp branches, food, tools, and bodies. Evolution does not design from a clean table. It repurposes. It takes structures already present and presses them into new combinations, and the result is often messy, brilliant, and imperfect. Speech is one of those results, a delicate use of anatomy that was never originally made for grammar, yet becomes capable of carrying worlds. Breath is one of the quiet foundations. Many animals make calls, but human speech requires unusually fine control over exhalation. A sentence is not one cry. It is a shaped flow of air divided into syllables, stressed and softened, sped up and slowed down, interrupted and resumed. The speaker must control not only whether sound happens, but how long it lasts, how forceful it is, and how it changes across time. This means that speech depends on the coordination of breathing with the nervous system in ways that are difficult to see in fossils. Ribs, vertebrae, and nerve pathways can offer hints, but no ancient skeleton preserves the exact rhythm of a spoken phrase. The evidence remains incomplete. The vocal tract adds another layer. The position of the larynx, the shape of the throat, the space inside the mouth, the flexibility of the tongue, and the movement of the lips all influence what sounds can be produced. Humans can make a vast range of vowels and consonants, but the price is anatomical vulnerability. The human throat helps speech, yet it also makes choking more dangerous than it is for many other mammals. This is a small but revealing detail. Language is not only a mental triumph, it is built into a body full of trade-offs. The same configuration that lets a person whisper a memory or name a star also requires careful coordination each time food and air pass through neighbouring passages. Older debates sometimes focused heavily on whether ancient hominins had a modern larynx, as if that alone could decide whether they spoke. The modern picture is more cautious. A low larynx may help produce certain sound ranges, but it is not the whole story. And some non-human animals can lower the larynx temporarily without possessing language. Speech depends not on one anatomical switch, but on a system the brain's control over sound, the shape of the vocal tract, the precision of breathing, the ability to hear contrasts, and the social pressure to make those contrasts matter. No single bone fully accounts for this. Hearing is just as important as making sound. A language community lives inside shared distinctions. One sound must be recognized as different from another. A small change in the tongue or lips can alter meaning entirely. For early humans, the ability to hear and process speech-like frequencies would have mattered greatly, and paleoanthropologists have studied the ear bones and hearing capacities of ancient human relatives for clues. Some evidence suggests that Neanderthals, for example, had hearing tuned in ways compatible with speech communication. But hearing capacity does not prove spoken language in the modern sense. It shows possibility, not vocabulary. It opens the door, but it does not tell us what passed through it. The skull also carries traces of muscle attachment, brain size, facial shape, and sensory structure, but language is not written plainly across bone. A fossil cranium can reveal the broad expansion of the brain, the shape of the face, the size of the jaws, and sometimes the canals through which nerves passed. It cannot reveal whether a group told origin stories, argued about roots, teased one another, or named the seasons. That is why the anatomy of speech must be treated with humility. It offers constraints and possibilities, not recordings. What survives in the record suggests that many human relatives possessed pieces of the language puzzle, but the exact moment those pieces became fully modern speech remains hidden. The hands, meanwhile, refuse to leave the story. Human hands are not silent partners. They point, measure, warn, invite, refuse, count, demonstrate, and remember. A stone toolmaker can guide another person not only with sound, but with movement. The angle of the wrist, the placement of the fingers, the direction of a strike, the pause before impact, the correction after a mistake, all of these can become communicative. Even today, speech is rarely alone. People gesture while explaining, even when no one can see them. The body seems to think with the hands as well as with the mouth. This deep partnership may have been even more important before speech became as dominant as it is now. Facial expression adds the social surface. The human face is mobile, readable, and tuned for attention. Eyebrows lift, eyes widen, mouths tighten. A gaze shifts toward an object before a word is spoken. In human conversation, meaning often begins before sound. A person knows when another is about to speak, when a correction is coming, when a joke is being softened, when a warning is serious. These subtleties are hard to fossilize, but they matter because language does not operate in empty air. It occurs between bodies that read one another constantly. Words are carried by expressions, posture, timing, and shared expectation. The surprising thing is that language may be less like a single invention than a convergence. The lungs provide controlled air, the throat shapes vibration, the mouth sculpts sound, the ears divide signal from noise, the brain links perception, memory, emotion, and motor control. The hands extend meaning outward. The face makes intention visible. The group supplies the reason for all of it. Without social life, the machinery has no great purpose. Without the machinery, social life cannot become speech. Somewhere in the long hominin past, these elements tighten together until communication becomes more precise, more teachable, more expandable, and more capable of surviving inside memory. No fossil can show the first sentence leaving a mouth, but ancient bodies can show that speech is not magic. It is an embodied achievement, built through millions of small adjustments and inherited capacities. The mystery remains, because anatomy alone cannot tell us when meaning became language. Yet it gives the silence shape. Before the first word can be lost to air, there must be a body able to breathe it, shape it, hear it, answer it, and pass it on. The body can make speech possible, but possibility is not the same as need. A throat may shape sound, a hand may point, a brain may connect perception with action, yet language does not grow in isolation. It grows where life becomes complicated enough that simpler signals begin to feel insufficient. For early human ancestors, that complication arrives not in one place and not all at once, but across a changing world of forests thinning, grasslands spreading and retreating, rivers shifting, animals migrating, dry seasons tightening, wet seasons returning, and groups learning that survival often depends on knowing more than what stands directly before the eyes. The long hominin threshold begins in landscapes that are unstable. Climate does not move like a simple staircase from forest to savanna. It pulses. Woodlands expand, shrink, fragment, and return. Lakes appear and vanish. Familiar plants become scarce. Herds move differently. Predators follow the bodies that feed them. In such a world, memory becomes valuable. It is not enough to react to the present moment. A group that remembers where water remained during the last dry season, where sharp stone can be found, where certain fruits ripen, where danger gathers near a narrow pass, carries an advantage that is partly physical and partly social. Knowledge must live not only in one mind, but among many. This is where communication begins to carry heavier loads. A warning cry can alert others to immediate danger, but a landscape of shifting resources demands something richer. A path must be indicated. A place must be remembered when no one is standing there. A technique must be repeated. A carcass found at a distance must be shared before scavengers or predators take it. A stone source must be revisited. A seasonal pattern must be expected before it arrives. These are not yet proof of language in the modern sense, but they create pressure for communication that can move beyond the instant. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the pattern of early human life suggests that memory and cooperation gradually become inseparable. Stone tools make this pressure visible. The earliest known tool traditions do not speak, but they preserve decisions. A stone flake is not a word, yet it records a sequence of actions, selection, striking, angle, force, correction, and purpose. Even simple tools require an understanding of how one material changes another. Later, more standardized tool traditions show even stronger evidence of learned routines. A hand axe, shaped with care on both sides, carries within it a kind of silent order. It is not random breaking, it reflects planning, motor skill, and attention to form. Someone has to learn how to do this, and learning complex actions is rarely just private discovery repeated from nothing in every generation. One can imagine an early toolmaker sitting beside stone, not in romantic silence, but in a world of watching bodies. A more experienced hand lifts a core, turns it, strikes near the edge, pauses, adjusts, and strikes again. Another watches. The lesson may involve gesture, rhythm, demonstration, correction, facial expression, perhaps vocal sounds that mark approval, warning, or attention. No one needs to imagine a full modern grammar at the beginning of toolmaking. But it is also difficult to imagine long traditions of technical skill without some durable means of social learning. What survives in the record suggests that culture is beginning to depend on transmission, and transmission pulls communication toward greater precision. Migration deepens the need. As early Homo groups move beyond familiar habitats, they enter new ecologies. Some follow coastlines, rivers, open corridors, or animal routes. Some remain close to water. Others adapt to more seasonal or open environments. Movement is not merely walking. It is the repeated solving of problems across unfamiliar ground. Where can stone be found? Which animals are dangerous? Which plants are edible? How far is the next shelter? When should a group move? And when should it stay? Even a small group needs coordination, and coordination becomes more difficult when the world is not predictable. Richer communication does not appear because the landscape politely requests it. It becomes useful because mistakes are costly. Homo erectus and closely related forms bring this part of the story into sharper focus. They have larger bodies, longer legs, and a capacity for long-distance movement that reshapes the human story. They spread far beyond Africa into parts of Eurasia, carrying stone technologies and lifeways into varied environments. Their world is not the world of modern humans, and scholars still debate the range of their cognitive and communicative abilities. But their success over immense spans of time suggests adaptability on a remarkable scale. A species that persists across changing climates and wide geography is not simply reacting blindly. It is solving, learning, remembering, and passing on enough behavior to remain viable. Fire, where it becomes controlled and regular, adds another possible pressure, though its timeline is complex and debated. Fire changes night, it changes food, it changes the way bodies gather after dark. It may extend the social day, making time for interaction when work and movement have slowed. Around fire, faces are visible in flickering light, hands can gesture, food can be shared. Attention can gather around a central place. It would be easy to overstate this and turn every ancient fire into a storytelling circle, but the possibility is powerful. Controlled fire, once firmly established, creates a social environment where sound, gesture, memory, and teaching may have gained new importance. Daily cooperation also matters. Early humans do not survive as isolated geniuses. They live by shared attention to food, danger, tools, weather, and one another. Some tasks require timing, others require patience. Some require individuals to tolerate each other near valuable resources, meat sharing, scavenging, hunting, gathering, carrying, shelter use, and defense against predators all create moments where coordination has real consequences. Human ancestors may not yet speak in the way later Homo sapiens speak, but they increasingly inhabit a world where the group itself becomes a thinking system. Information moves through bodies, gestures, sounds, habits, and repeated routines. There is a lesser-known but important point here. Cultural traditions can grow before language is fully modern. Animals can learn socially. Apes can pass on tool-use habits. Birds can transmit songs. Whales can maintain vocal traditions. Culture is not an all-or-nothing human possession, but human culture eventually becomes unusually cumulative, meaning one generation does not merely repeat the last. It can preserve improvements, combine techniques, and build complexity over time. The early roots of that cumulative tendency may lie in these long hominin thresholds, where better communication allows learning to become more stable, and stable learning allows more complex behavior to survive. No single explanation fully accounts for how this process unfolded. Perhaps gesture led the way in tool-making contexts. Perhaps vocal signals became more important as groups moved through open landscapes where hands were busy or visibility was limited. Perhaps rhythm, imitation, and shared attention mattered more than any one signal type. Perhaps different hominin populations leaned on different mixtures of sound, gesture, and demonstration. The past does not offer one clean line. It offers overlapping traces, but across those traces, a pattern emerges as early humans become more mobile, more cooperative, more tool-dependent, and more reliant on memory. Communication becomes increasingly central to survival. The first human words still lie far ahead, hidden behind millions of vanished moments. Yet the world that will need them is taking shape. It is a world where a place not currently visible may matter. A technique learned yesterday may save effort tomorrow. A danger seen by one must become known to others. A route, a season, a stone source, a fire, a carcass, a shelter, a memory, all of these become more valuable when they can be shared. Language does not begin here as a finished system, but the need for something like it grows stronger with every step across uncertain ground. Before the first sentence, there is a world of half-visible meaning. A hand lifts and the group pauses, a head turns and others follow the gaze. A sharp sound cuts through the air and bodies tighten before anyone has time to think. A stone is passed from one person to another, not randomly, but with the angle already suggesting what must be done next. A face changes, a mouth opens, a breathy call marks attention, a gesture marks direction, meaning moves through the group. But it has not yet hardened into the kind of language that can be written down, translated, or reconstructed. It lives in action. This is the difficult middle ground in the story of language before history. It is easy to imagine silence before speech, but that is almost certainly wrong. It is also easy to imagine fully modern conversation suddenly appearing in one brilliant leap. But that is too simple. Between instinctive calls and human language lies a broad, shadowed territory of gesture, sound, rhythm, imitation, shared attention, and learned expectation. Much of early communication may have lived there for a very long time. The evidence remains incomplete, because these signals vanish even more completely than bones. A raised eyebrow leaves nothing. A pointed finger disappears. A repeated teaching sound dies in the air. Yet these vanished acts may have been essential steps toward words. Shared attention is one of the deepest clues. Human beings are extraordinary at attending together to something beyond themselves. One person points, and another follows the direction. One looks at an object and then back at a companion, as if confirming that both minds are now joined to the same thing. This may seem simple, but it is the beginning of a powerful mental bridge. To communicate about the world, two individuals must not merely see, they must know, in some practical sense, that they are seeing together. Before language can refer to an absent animal, a future route, or an imagined danger, it must first develop the ability to anchor meaning in shared attention. Gesture may have carried much of this burden. A hand can point toward food, trace a route, mimic the movement of an animal, demonstrate how to strike stone, signal waiting, invite approach, or warn away. Unlike many vocal calls, gestures can be shaped intentionally and adjusted to a receiver. If someone is not watching, the signaller can move into view, repeat the gesture, touch the other body, or use sound to gain attention first. This flexibility is why many scholars have long considered gesture a strong candidate for an early pathway into language. Hands are visible, precise, and already central to tool use. They allow meaning to be performed before it is spoken. But sound has powers, gesture does not. A voice can travel when bodies are turned away. It can pass through darkness, brush, smoke, distance, and poor visibility. It can free the hands for carrying, climbing, working, or holding tools. It can keep a group loosely connected when individuals spread out across a landscape. It can carry emotion quickly. A call can stop movement before a gesture is seen. A soft vocalization can maintain contact without demanding full attention. If gesture offers precision, sound offers reach. The origins of language may not require choosing between them. More likely, early communication drew strength from both, with voice and hand supporting one another long before speech became dominant. Rhythm may have been another bridge. Repeated actions create repeated patterns, striking stone, walking together, processing food, grooming, carrying, working around fire, moving through terrain. Rhythm helps bodies coordinate. It also helps memory. A repeated sound or movement is easier to learn and easier to anticipate. Long before formal song or poetry, early humans may have used rhythmic patterns in teaching, social bonding, or group movement. The point is not that language began as music in any simple way. Scholars still debate the role of musicality, rhythm, and emotional vocalization in language evolution. But rhythm is one of the ways the body turns passing moments into remembered sequences, and sequence is essential to language. Imitation also matters. A learner copies a movement, a sound, a posture, a tool-making strike, a way of carrying, a way of approaching a dangerous animal or avoiding one. Social learning depends on the capacity to notice not just the final result, but the method. Early hominins who could imitate more accurately could preserve more detailed traditions. Imitation does not require full language, but it prepares the ground for it. Once a group becomes good at copying meaningful actions, those actions can become conventional. A gesture can come to stand for a request. A sound can become associated with a place, an object, or a shared activity. Meaning begins to detach from the immediate moment and become repeatable. Conventional meaning is a crucial step. A signal becomes more powerful when its meaning is not reinvented each time. If a certain gesture is understood by several individuals in a group, it becomes part of the group's communicative world. If a sound reliably draws attention to a kind of object or activity, it gains stability. Human words are built on such stability, but the earlier stages may have been far messier overlapping gestures, repeated calls, mimed actions, emotional sounds, and learned signals tied to specific situations. No single explanation fully accounts for how these elements became language, yet it is easy to see how social life could reward those that were clearer, more flexible, and easier to remember. There is a surprising humility in this. The earliest path toward language may not have looked grand. It may not have sounded like formal speech at all. It may have been filled with pointing, grunts, lip sounds, hand movements, shared glances, copied rhythms, and repeated demonstrations. It may have been deeply practical here, there, wait, danger, come, give, watch, do this, not that. But practicality should not be mistaken for simplicity. The ability to make another mind attend to something specific is already profound. From that small bridge, larger bridges can be built. The world before the first sentence may also have been emotionally rich. Communication is not only about information, it is about belonging, grooming, touch, soft sounds, synchronized movement, and shared routines can strengthen bonds. A group that trusts its members can cooperate more effectively. A group that can reduce tension without constant conflict can remain together longer. Human language later becomes a tool for storytelling, planning, and explanation. But it also remains a tool of social closeness. Greetings, murmurs, reassurance, humor, and shared memory all help maintain community. Those functions likely have deep roots. Before speech becomes a carrier of abstract thought, Communication is already a way of keeping the group from falling apart. At the same time, one must be careful not to overpaint the unknown. We cannot reconstruct the calls of early Homo. We cannot know whether a particular gesture meant stone, water, danger, or follow. We cannot say when a sound first became a name rather than a signal. What survives in the record suggests increasing complexity, but the exact shape of prelinguistic communication is gone. The safest view is also the most interesting. Early hominin communication was probably not language as we know it, but neither was it a blank absence. It was a living field of meaning, embodied and social, with voice and gesture braided together. From this field, language can begin to grow. Once a gesture can refer, once a sound can be repeated, once attention can be shared, once memory can be taught, the distance to words begins to narrow. The first sentence is still hidden, the first named animal, the first remembered place, the first spoken promise, the first account of something not present. All of these remain beyond reach, but the world before the first sentence is no longer silent. It is full of signals waiting to become more than signals, movements waiting to become signs, sounds waiting to become words, and minds learning, slowly, how to meet one another in the space between bodies. By the time Homo sapiens enters the story, the ground has already been prepared by millions of years of social life, gesture, voice, imitation, and shared attention. But prepared ground is not the same as a forest in bloom. The question now becomes more precise, and more dangerous to answer too quickly. When, in the long history of our own species, does the capacity for language become something that every human community carries? Not merely a set of useful signals, not only gestures beside tools or calls across distance, but the underlying ability to build full human language sounds arranged into patterns, patterns attached to meaning, meaning opened into memory, teaching, planning, and imagination. The answer does not come from a cave painting or a fossil throat. It comes from a different archive, one that early archaeologists could not read at all, the genome. In the last few decades, human origins research has been transformed by genetic evidence. DNA has turned skeletons into family histories, population movements into patterns of inheritance, and ancient separations into approximate dates. It has shown that the story of Homo sapiens is not a simple march from one birthplace into the world, but a braided African history of populations dividing, mixing, surviving, and carrying pieces of one another forward. Inside that braided history lies a clue to language. Not because DNA preserves words, but because it can help estimate when the ancestral human population began to separate into lineages whose descendants all possess language today. The argument is careful, and it must be handled carefully. It does not claim that the first word was spoken exactly 135,000 years ago. It does not claim that language suddenly appeared in one generation. It does not tell us what early Homo sapiens said, how their languages sounded, how many words they used, or whether their speech would feel familiar to a modern listener. Instead, it gives a lower boundary, a latest point by which linguistic capacity was probably already present. Around 135,000 years ago, according to one influential estimate drawn from genome-level studies of early Homo sapiens population divisions, the original stem population of our species had already begun to branch. Since all known descendant human populations have full language, the reasoning goes, the shared capacity for language must have existed before that branching took place. This is not the same as saying all later languages are the same. They are not. The world's languages differ beautifully and profoundly in sound, grammar, rhythm, vocabulary, and structure. Some use tones to change meaning, some build long words from many parts, some rely on word order, others on endings, particles, or complex systems of agreement. Some have click consonants, some have none. Some distinguish sounds that speakers of other languages struggle even to hear. But beneath that diversity lies a shared human capacity. Every human population, as far as evidence can show, has language. There is no living branch of Homo sapiens that communicates through some fundamentally lesser or non-linguistic system. There are thousands of languages, but not separate grades of humanity. That point matters ethically as well as scientifically. Older theories often treated some peoples as closer to a supposed primitive state, and such ideas have left a long and damaging shadow. Modern research offers no support for that hierarchy. Present-day hunter-gatherer, pastoral farming, urban island, mountain, desert, and forest communities all possess fully human language. No language is a fossil of an earlier stage. No living people speak a half-language. The genetic argument about early population divisions is not a ranking of cultures, it is almost the opposite. It says that the capacity for language was already part of the shared inheritance of Homo sapiens, before the major divisions that later helped produce the vast diversity of modern humanity. The date itself sits in a deep and difficult period. Homo sapiens as an anatomically distinctive species is older, with fossils pushing the roots of our species far beyond 135,000 years. By this time, humans have already lived through long climatic shifts in Africa. Landscapes have changed from wetter to drier and back again. Lakes have expanded and contracted. Habitats have fragmented and reconnected. Groups have moved, separated, met again, and exchanged genes. The human body is already largely modern in many respects, but the archaeological record does not show one simple explosion of behaviour everywhere at once. Instead, it shows patchy signals tools, pigments, ornaments, long-distance materials, changing technologies, and traces of symbolic activity appearing in different places and times. This patchiness is part of the mystery. If linguistic capacity was present by around 135,000 years ago, why does the archaeological record not immediately become full of obvious symbolic monuments, elaborate art, and unmistakable ritual objects everywhere? The answer may be that language and its visible consequences are not identical. A community can speak richly without leaving many durable objects behind. Words can carry lore, kinship, memory, humour, place names, and stories while the physical record remains sparse. Materials decay, sites disappear beneath water or sediment. Many activities leave no trace. A society may have complex language without building cities, carving statues, or painting caves that survive for archaeologists to find. There is also a difference between capacity and expression. A body may be capable of running long before it must run every day. A brain may be capable of language before social and ecological conditions make certain kinds of symbolic expression widespread. Early Homo sapiens could have possessed full linguistic capacity while using it mainly for the demands of their world movement. Cooperation, teaching, social bonds, memory, and survival. Much of that would vanish instantly. A spoken rule about where to gather shellfish leaves no fossil. A story about a dangerous place leaves no trace unless it becomes tied to an object. A burial, a painting, or a preserved camp. The silence of the record is not the same as silence in life. The 135,000-year argument therefore shifts the story in an important way. It moves language away from being only a late Ice Age flourish and places it deeper inside the shared identity of Homo sapiens. It suggests that by the time some of the earliest major divisions within our species had formed, the basic human ability to acquire and transmit language was already there. Not necessarily writing, not necessarily cave art, not necessarily myths that would resemble later recorded traditions, but the biological and cognitive capacity that allows any human child, in any normal language community, to grow into speech. Scholars still debate how far back beyond that date the capacity may extend, and whether some earlier humans outside Homo sapiens possessed language-like systems of great complexity. The evidence remains incomplete, and the boundary is not a wall. Still, the implication is immense. Somewhere before those early divisions, in African populations living through climates and landscapes now mostly vanished, language had become part of what it meant to be human. It belonged not to one tribe, not to one region, not to one later civilization, but to the common inheritance of the species. The first human words were already lost by then, perhaps lost for tens of thousands of years before that, but the ability to make new words, to teach them, to understand them, to build thought out of them, and to pass them into the minds of others had become durable enough to travel with every branch. The cave handprint still waits in the future, the great painted animals wait, the narrative scenes of Indonesia wait, the conventional signs etched onto bone and stone wait. But before those visible traces, there is a quieter turning point. It has no monument, it has no single artifact. It is written only indirectly, in the fact that every human population that later emerges carries the same astonishing possibility to turn breath into meaning, meaning into memory, and memory into a world shared by more than one mind. If language is already part of the shared inheritance of Homo sapiens by around 135,000 years ago, then the next part of the mystery is not simply whether humans could speak. It is what speech begins to do to human life. A capacity can exist quietly for a long time before it changes the visible shape of the world. A community may have words, names, warnings, memories, and stories, yet leave only stone flakes, charcoal, bone fragments, and faint stains in the soil. But somewhere in the deep past, perhaps by around 100,000 years ago, language seems to become more than a tool for immediate coordination. It becomes a social force. It begins to bind groups across time, to preserve knowledge beyond one body, and to turn survival into culture. The difference is subtle, but important. A call can alert others to danger, a gesture can guide attention, a demonstration can teach a hand how to strike stone. Language can do all of this and more. It can explain why a place matters when the place is not visible. It can describe a route before anyone begins walking. It can warn about a seasonal pattern that has not yet returned. It can carry rules about sharing, obligations, kinship, and trust. It can hold the memory of a storm, a migration, a good water source, a failed hunt, a healing plant, or a death long after the first witnesses are gone. Once this happens, knowledge no longer has to remain trapped inside individual experience. It can travel. That is one of the great transformations of human life before history. The world becomes larger than what any one person has seen. A young adult may learn of valleys never visited, animals never encountered, distant groups never met, and dangers remembered from before their own birth. A toolmaker may inherit not only a technique, but a reason for doing it that way. A group may carry place names across generations, attaching memory to hills, rivers, caves, beaches, cliffs, and trees. The landscape stops being merely terrain. It becomes a map of spoken meaning. Around 100,000 years ago, Homo sapiens communities in Africa and nearby regions are living through shifting climates and changing opportunities. Wet corridors open and close. Deserts expand and soften. Coastlines offer shellfish, fish, birds, and plant foods. Inland environments demand different skills. Humans move, pause, split, and reconnect. In such conditions, language would not be a decorative luxury. It would be a way to reduce uncertainty. A group that can exchange information about weather, resources, neighboring groups, animal movement, and technical knowledge gains a powerful advantage. The evidence remains incomplete, because most of that exchange vanishes. But the archaeological record increasingly suggests humans are living in ways that depend on transmitted knowledge. One can see this indirectly in the use of materials. Some ancient sites show objects or raw materials moved across distances, suggesting planned movement, exchange, or knowledge of faraway sources. Pigments appear in some places, sometimes processed in ways that imply repeated practice and possible social meaning. Shell beads and ornaments begin to appear in parts of Africa and the Near East, not as writing, but as signs worn on the body. A bead can mark identity, connection, memory, status, belonging, or beauty. It does not tell us exactly what anyone said about it. Still, ornament is rarely meaningless. It becomes powerful because others understand it. That shared understanding is difficult to imagine without rich communication. Language also changes teaching. In a purely imitative world, learning depends heavily on watching and copying. That remains important, and human learning never stops relying on the eye and hand. But speech can highlight invisible details. It can draw attention to the angle, the timing, the danger, the reason, the exception. It can say not there, wait longer, strike softer, follow that track, avoid that plant, return when the moon changes, look for the wind from the south. Even if the exact words are lost, the principle matters. Language can compress experience. It can make another person's mistake useful without repeating the mistake. It can turn a lifetime of observation into guidance that fits inside a few breaths. The social consequences are just as deep. Human groups are not held together only by food and proximity. They are held together by trust, reputation, obligation, affection, memory, and expectation. Language gives these invisible bonds a stronger form. It allows people to talk about others who are absent. It allows promises to be made and remembered. It allows conflicts to be negotiated without every tension becoming physical. It allows shared rules to be taught and retold. It allows a group to decide who belongs, who has violated trust, who must be helped, and who must be watched carefully. This can make cooperation more flexible, but also more demanding. A speaking community is a community of memory, and memory gives social life weight. There is a surprising side to this. Language may have expanded human power not only by helping people describe the outer world, but by helping them manage the inner one. Fear can be named, loss can be remembered, desire can be shaped into request rather than action. A plan can be held in the group before it becomes movement. A story can make suffering bearable or make danger meaningful. None of this leaves a clean artifact. Yet the emotional life of early humans was not separate from the evolution of language. Speech gives feeling a structure others can share. It turns private experience into something that can be held by more than one person. At this point, the first human words are already irretrievable, but human life may be increasingly word-shaped. Camps are not simply places where bodies sleep and eat. They become centers of repeated knowledge. A place beside a river may hold names for fishing spots, warnings about floods, memories of past meetings, techniques for preparing food, and stories attached to nearby stone or trees. A route across open country may exist not only as footprints, but as spoken sequence. From this hill to that water, from that water to the red stone, from the red stone to the shelter beyond the ridge, language lets a group carry a landscape inside itself. Scholars still debate how visible this transformation should be in archaeology. Some argue that symbolic artifacts mark major cognitive changes. Others caution that absence of surviving symbols does not mean absence of language or thought. Preservation is uneven. Many early sites lie beneath later sediments, drowned coastlines, or landscapes no longer easily accessible. Organic materials decay. Spoken traditions disappear. The record favours stone, bone, shell, and pigment, while much of life happens in wood, fibre, skin, voice, and memory. No single explanation fully accounts for the unevenness of the evidence. What seems increasingly plausible is that language becomes a multiplier. It does not replace hands, tools, movement, or observation. It makes them more powerful. A tool tradition can become more stable because it is taught with words as well as demonstration. A migration can become safer because information travels ahead in speech. A group identity can become stronger because people remember the same stories. A dangerous world can become more navigable because the dead leave knowledge behind in the living. This is the quiet revolution before writing, not the invention of marks on a surface, but the creation of communities in which memory can be spoken, corrected, repeated, and inherited. The cave wall waits, still blank in many places. The great images and signs of the later Ice Age have not yet taken their full visible form, but by this stage, the human voice may already be doing what stone cannot preserve. It is linking minds across distance and time. It is making culture cumulative. It is giving shape to belonging. It is turning the world into something not merely experienced, but told. When language becomes powerful, most of its work still leaves no mark. A warning spoken near a river disappears with the wind. A lesson about stone vanishes after the hand learns it. A memory carried around a fire may survive inside a community for generations and still leave nothing that a future archaeologist can lift from the soil. But eventually, in scattered places across the prehistoric world, meaning begins to cling to durable things. Pigment stains a shell. A pattern is scratched into ochre. A bead is pierced and worn. A bone is marked. A stone surface is touched again and again until it becomes more than stone. These are not words, but they are the first places where the invisible life of speech begins to cast a shadow. This is the threshold between language as breath and language as memory outside the body. It is not writing. It is not a script. It cannot be read like a sentence. Yet it suggests that humans are increasingly using objects, colours, surfaces, and repeated forms to carry social meaning. A piece of red ochre does not explain itself. A perforated shell does not announce what it meant to the person who wore it. A geometric mark on a fragment of stone may look simple to modern eyes, but simplicity is deceptive. A mark can be made quickly and still belong to a world of shared attention, habit, identity, and memory. What survives in the record suggests that the human mind is no longer only communicating in the moment. It is beginning to leave hints for later. Pigment is one of the oldest and most haunting clues. Ochre, especially red ochre, appears in many prehistoric contexts, sometimes collected, ground, scraped, or transported. It can be used for practical purposes, including hideworking or mixtures with adhesives. But it can also colour the body, objects, and surfaces. Archaeology often cannot separate practical and symbolic uses cleanly. A red stain may be technological, decorative, ritual, social, or several of these at once. Scholars still debate the meanings of early pigment use, yet pigment matters because it changes appearance deliberately. It makes something stand out. It marks a surface as touched by intention. To colour the body is to make the body readable. To colour an object is to change how others see it. To colour a wall is to place a sign where others may return. Even without knowing the exact meanings, one can see the communicative potential. A group that understands certain colours, patterns, or objects in shared ways has created a symbolic field. The sign does not have to be universal. It only has to matter within a community. A band of pigment on the skin, a bead at the neck, a pattern on a tool, a mark near a shelter entrance, these may all work because others know how to respond. Meaning becomes social, visible, and durable enough to survive beyond the voice. Ornaments deepen the clue. A pierced shell or bead worn on the body can travel with a person. It moves through the landscape as a small sign of identity. It may mark belonging, age, relationship, skill, exchange, beauty, memory, or connection to a place. No single bead can tell us which of these meanings it carried. The evidence remains incomplete. But ornaments are not like ordinary waste from food or tool-making. They are made to be seen. They often require selection, modification, and time. Some shells found far from their natural source suggest movement or exchange networks. Such objects hint at social worlds in which visible signs matter because people recognize them. The surprising thing is that symbolic behavior does not appear everywhere at once in a neat wave. It flickers, it appears in one region, fades from the record, appears elsewhere, changes form, and sometimes becomes difficult to interpret. This does not necessarily mean human minds were turning symbolism on and off. Preservation is uneven, and practices using wood, fibre, skin, feathers, plant dyes, sand, or voice may have vanished completely. Coastal sites may be drowned. Camps may be erased by erosion. A world rich in spoken stories and body decoration could leave fewer traces than one cave wall protected by unusual conditions. Still, the keyhole matters. The visible signs of the Ice Age mind reveal a growing ability to place meaning in things that are not alive. A word is a sound attached by convention to meaning. A symbol is a mark, object, colour, or image attached by convention to meaning. Both depend on shared understanding, but they work differently. Speech is flexible, fast, and invisible. Symbols are slower, more durable, and tied to materials. When they begin to appear together in human life, they may reinforce one another. Imagine a small object passed from hand to hand. Its surface is shaped, coloured, marked, or pierced. Around it, voices explain what it is, who made it, where it came from, or why it matters. Without the voices, the object might be meaningless. Without the object, the memory might be harder to hold. Together, speech and symbol create a stronger form of transmission. A sign becomes a handle for a story. A colour becomes a reminder. A mark becomes a place where attention returns. This is one of the quiet foundations of later human culture, not writing yet, but the habit of letting things remember with us. The same principle may apply to repeated marks, lines, crosshatches, notches, dots, and geometric forms appear in different prehistoric contexts, though their meanings are often uncertain. Some may be decorative, some may record counts, phases, ownership, events, or simply repeated habits of making. It would be careless to call every scratch a message. Natural damage, casual marks, and practical modifications can mislead. But when marks are deliberate, patterned, and repeated, they raise a difficult possibility. Human beings may be experimenting with forms that hold attention in structured ways. They may not yet be writing, but they are learning that a surface can preserve an arrangement made by the mind. This has deep consequences for the mystery of the first words. Once symbols appear, they show that language is not trapped inside the throat. The human habit of meaning has spread outward. It has entered objects, bodies, places, and surfaces. It has become something people can see together. When people return to the same marked object or coloured wall, they may also return to the same memory, story, rule, identity, or feeling. The sign becomes a meeting point between past and present. No single artifact proves the existence of storytelling. No bead preserves a sentence. No patch of pigment reveals the grammar of its makers. Yet the broader pattern suggests humans are increasingly living in worlds saturated with reference. Things point beyond themselves. A shell may point to the sea, a colour to a group, a mark to an act, a pattern to a memory, an image to an animal not present. This is the symbolic atmosphere in which later cave art will become possible. It is not the beginning of language, but it is one of the places where language becomes visible. The path from spoken meaning to visual sign is neither simple nor inevitable. Some speaking societies leave few durable symbols. Some marks may have meanings that no outside observer could guess, but by the time pigments, ornaments, and patterned marks accumulate in the record, the silence of prehistory has changed. It is still silent, but not blank. It has stains, scratches, beads, and surfaces where minds have pressed outward. The first words remain lost, yet around them, a world of signs begins to gather, as if speech itself is learning how to leave a trace. Far from the old European caves that once dominated the imagination of Ice Age art, on an island landscape of limestone towers, tropical heat, monsoon rain, and deep green valleys, the human story leaves one of its most astonishing marks. Sulawesi rises between seas, not as a quiet backdrop but as a world of cliffs, caves, cast chambers, shadowed passages, and animals unlike those of the northern Ice Age plains. Here, the deep past is not wrapped in snow and mammoth steppe. It breathes with humidity, bats, birds, forest, rock, and water moving through stone. And somewhere in that landscape, tens of thousands of years before writing, a human hand or mind turns the cave wall into a place where meaning can endure. The importance of Sulawesi is not only that ancient people made art there, it is that the dates are so deep. Rock art in this region pushes symbolic expression far back into the human past, with evidence placing some images at least around 67,800 years old. That is an immense number when placed beside writing, cities, or agriculture. It means that long before temples, kings, clay tablets, or formal scripts, humans in island Southeast Asia are already marking cave walls in ways that suggest symbolic imagination. They are not merely surviving in a difficult world, they are representing it. They are making something that can outlast the immediate act of making. To understand why this matters for language, one must resist the temptation to treat cave art as a direct translation of speech. A painted animal is not a word. A hand stencil is not a sentence. A red figure on stone does not tell us the sound of the language spoken by its maker. No grammar is preserved in pigment. No verb tense hides in the outline of a hoof. but the act of making such images reveals a mind and a community capable of shared reference. It shows that humans can take something seen, remembered, feared, admired, hunted, avoided, or imagined, and place it onto a surface where others may return to it. That is not language itself, but it belongs to the same broad human revolution, the ability to make meaning stand outside the body. Sulawesi's cave art also shifts the geography of the story. For many years, public imagination placed the earliest great art almost automatically in Europe, especially in places like Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira. Those caves remain extraordinary, but the finds in Indonesia and surrounding regions have changed the emotional map of prehistory. Symbolic expression is not a European miracle. It is not the sudden flowering of one small corner of the Ice Age world. It appears across wider human landscapes, including tropical islands and routes that early Homo sapiens followed while moving towards Sahul, the ancient combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea. The story of symbolic humanity is wider, warmer, and more ocean-facing than older narratives allowed. This is a lesser-known surprise with deep consequences. Humans reaching and living across island Southeast Asia must deal with broken geography. Seas divide land. Coastlines shift with glacial cycles. Islands become stepping stones, barriers, refuges, and meeting zones. Movement through such worlds demands memory, planning, ecological knowledge, and probably forms of communication rich enough to coordinate across unfamiliar terrain. Some crossings would have required attention to weather, currents, materials, timing, and group decisions. The evidence for boats and seafaring in the deep past is often difficult to preserve, but the presence of humans across these island regions speaks to remarkable adaptability. In such a world, language would not be decoration. It would be a practical force braided into movement, learning, and survival. The animals painted on Sulawesi cave walls are not random decorations floating outside life. They come from a world humans know closely. Some are local creatures, part of the island's ecology, bodies encountered in forests, clearings, and memory. When an animal is painted, the image may carry more than visual likeness. It may hold knowledge of behavior, danger, food, pursuit, season, identity, or belief. Scholars still debate exactly what such images meant to the people who made them, and it would be careless to claim certainty. The meanings could have been many at once. They may have been connected to hunting, teaching, myth, territory, initiation, memory, or experiences we have no surviving category for. The wall gives the image, but not the explanation. Still, the image changes the nature of the cave. A cave is a shelter, a passage, a cool chamber, a place of darkness, a refuge from weather, sometimes a dangerous place. But when images appear on its walls, it becomes something else as well. It becomes a memory surface. It becomes a place where people may gather, look, return, and perhaps speak about what is shown. Even if no story is painted in a sequence, the image invites attention. A figure on stone can hold a group's gaze in common. It can become the center of words, gestures, teachings, warnings, jokes, or quiet recognition. The painting may be silent, but it creates a stage on which language can gather. Hand stencils carry a different kind of intimacy. Unlike an animal figure, a hand stencil is an index of a body. It says, without words, someone was here, not in the abstract, but physically. A hand was placed against stone. Pigment was blown or applied around it. The body withdrew, leaving its absence visible. There is something almost impossible to reduce about that act. It is neither writing nor portrait, yet it is personal. It marks presence through negative space. It turns the human body into a sign. Thousands of years later, the viewer sees not the person, but the place where the person blocked the colour. It is a survival of contact. For the language story, this matters because speech also works through presence and absence. A word can refer to something not present. A name can summon a person who is far away or dead. A story can make an event reappear in the minds of listeners. A hand stencil does something similar in visual form. It preserves the trace of a body that is gone. It allows later eyes to encounter a human absence as a kind of presence. No single explanation fully accounts for why these stencils were made, but their persistence across prehistoric regions suggests that humans found deep meaning in marking the relationship between body, surface, and time. Dating such art is difficult, and the science behind it is careful. Pigment itself may be hard to date directly. Researchers often date mineral deposits that formed over or under the art, giving minimum or bracketed ages rather than simple birthdays for an image. This means every date must be understood with caution. An image dated to at least a certain age may be older still. The evidence remains incomplete, and new discoveries can shift the timeline. But even with caution, the Sulawesi dates are profound. They place symbolic image-making far enough back that it cannot be treated as a late, isolated afterthought. It belongs to the deep human past. The cave wall, then, becomes one of the first great witnesses for language without preserving language itself. It tells us that by this time humans can externalize meaning, revisit it, and perhaps use it as a focus for shared attention. It suggests that speech, memory, image, and community are becoming tightly linked. Around such walls, one can imagine not exact words, but the need for words pointing to the figure, naming the animal, recalling an encounter, teaching a pattern, connecting the living to those who stood there before. The image does not speak, but it makes speech feel almost inevitable around it. Sulawesi's ancient art does not solve the mystery of the first human words, it deepens it. It shows that long before writing, humans have already crossed into a world where the mind can leave durable signs. They can make a mark that waits in darkness for another mind. They can turn stone into memory, and somewhere near those images, in languages now completely vanished. People likely spoke about what the wall held, never knowing that the colour might outlive every word they used to explain it. The Sulawesi wall shows that humans could make images very deep in time, but one image alone does not always reveal how the mind is arranging the world. A handprint is presence, an animal figure is recognition, a sign is attention made durable, yet a scene is something more difficult and more dangerous to interpret. A scene suggests relationship. One figure stands near another. Bodies face, reach, pursue, confront, surround, or interact. The eye no longer rests on a single mark. It begins to move between marks, asking how they belong together, and when figures belong together, the possibility of story enters the cave. At Lingkarampuang in Sulawesi, researchers identified a painted scene at least 51,200 years old, showing a large wild pig and 3 smaller human-like figures. The image is not a written tale. It is not a captioned event. It does not tell us who the figures are, what they are doing, what the pig means, or whether the painting refers to something witnessed, imagined, taught, remembered, or believed. But the arrangement matters. The figures are not merely scattered marks. They appear in relation to one another. That is why the discovery has been described as among the oldest known evidence for narrative art. It pushes the visible trace of storytelling into a time so remote that the usual timelines of culture begin to feel too narrow. Storytelling is not the same as decoration. Decoration can repeat, beautify, mark, or identify. Story binds elements through time and relation. It suggests before and after, actor and event, tension and resolution, presence and absence. A story does not have to be long. It does not have to be written. It can be carried in gesture, song, image, memory, or a few spoken lines. The Leng Karampuang painting does not let us hear those lines, if any were spoken. But it shows that early humans were capable of placing multiple figures into a shared visual field in a way that later viewers can recognize as relational. That is a profound cognitive act. The large pig in the scene is not an abstract symbol floating beyond life. In Sulawesi, wild pigs are part of the human environment, visible, mobile, dangerous in some contexts, valuable in others, and deeply known. To paint such an animal is to draw from a world of encounter, but the human-like figures complicate the scene. They are smaller, less naturalistic, and more enigmatic. In some Indonesian cave art, figures that appear partly human and partly animal have been interpreted as therianthropes, beings with mixed qualities. Such interpretations must be cautious. It is possible to see more than the ancient painter intended. Shapes can weather, meanings can vanish, and modern categories can be poor containers for prehistoric thought. Still, the presence of human-like figures interacting with an animal opens a door into imagination, memory, and perhaps mythic thinking. This is where language returns, not as preserved object, but as a likely companion. A scene on a wall invites explanation. Someone may point to one figure, then another. Someone may identify the animal, describe an action, recall a place, or connect the image to a shared belief. The painting itself may carry enough meaning for those who already know the story. It may not need to explain everything, because the explanation lives in the community. In many oral cultures, images and objects do not function as complete texts. They are anchors. They summon what listeners already know. A marked surface can be the doorway through which speech returns again and again. No one can reconstruct the words spoken in front of the Leng Karampuang wall. No grammar, no vocabulary, no names survive. But if the image did carry narrative meaning, then it belongs to a human world where speech and image likely work together. The wall holds the visible skeleton of an event or idea. The voice gives it motion. Around such images, people may have taught younger members of the community, reinforced group memory, marked identity, or told of beings and encounters beyond ordinary life. The child safety of the historical imagination matters here when younger people are mentioned. The scene need not involve danger or harm. It is enough to imagine them protected within a group, learning by looking, listening, and being included in a shared memory. The dating of the painting adds another layer of awe and caution. The age comes from methods that analyze mineral deposits associated with the art, especially calcium carbonate layers that formed over the pigment. The result is a minimum age. The painting is at least that old, and perhaps older. This means the image has endured through climatic shifts, countless rainy seasons, the growth and decay of forests, the movement of people across islands, the drowning and revealing of coastlines, and the disappearance of every language once spoken by its makers. The pigment stayed while the voices vanished. That contrast is one of the central tragedies and beauties of prehistory. The surprising detail is how early the image appears when compared with many famous European examples. For much of the 20th century, the public story of ancient art was dominated by Europe. Prehistoric creativity seemed to awaken in the dark caves of France and Spain, as if symbolic humanity had a single northern stage. But Sulawesi overturns that narrow image. Here, in tropical island Southeast Asia, people were creating figurative and possibly narrative art tens of thousands of years before the first cities, and far earlier than many classic European cave sites. The human imagination was not waiting in one region to begin. It was already wide across the world. That wide world matters for the origins of language because language travels with people. As Homo sapiens expands across diverse environments, speech must adapt to new landscapes, new animals, new routes, new materials, and new memories. A language born in one ecology cannot remain unchanged when the world changes around it. New names are needed, new stories grow, new dangers and opportunities must be explained. In island worlds, where limestone caves, sea crossings, forests, and unfamiliar animals shape life, communication becomes a way to turn the unknown into the shareable. The image of a pig and human-like figures may be local, but the human ability behind it is part of a global pattern. Still, one must not confuse story with certainty. Archaeologists can identify relations among figures, propose narrative interpretation, compare imagery, date mineral layers, and place the art within broader patterns of symbolic behavior. They cannot interview the painter. They cannot ask whether the scene records a hunt, a myth, a teaching, a vision, a memory, or something outside modern categories. Scholars still debate how to define narrative art in the deep past, and the evidence remains incomplete. The safer statement is powerful enough by at least 51,200 years ago. Humans in Sulawesi were making figurative images arranged in scenes, and those scenes suggest the roots of storytelling were already ancient. The wall, then, becomes a threshold between seeing and telling. A single animal image may say, "Remember this creature." A scene may say, "Remember what happened," or what happens, or what is believed to happen between beings. That small shift is enormous. It means the mind is not only naming the world, but connecting parts of it through relation. Relation is the heart of grammar as well. Words become language when they're not isolated labels, but organized meanings who did what, where, when, to whom, and why it matters. The cave painting is not grammar, yet it reveals a mind comfortable with arrangement, association, and shared reference. Long after the people of Leangkarampuang are gone, the figures remain in their fragile red silence. The pig stands, the smaller bodies hover near it. The scene waits in the limestone darkness, holding just enough form to make later minds wonder. Perhaps the ancient viewers did not wonder in the same way. Perhaps they knew exactly what they were seeing. Perhaps the wall did not puzzle them at all. It may have been familiar, powerful, ordinary, sacred, practical, playful, or something no modern word can recover. But for us, it is a message without its voice, a story without its teller, and one of the clearest signs that long before history, humans were already arranging the world into scenes that could be remembered. A painted scene on a cave wall can hold the possibility of story, but it is still an image of bodies in relation an animal, a human-like figure, a posture, a moment frozen in pigment. The next clue is stranger because it is smaller, colder, and less immediately alive. It does not show a pig, a hunter, a hand, or a face. It appears as lines, notches, dots, crosses, star-like forms, and repeated geometric marks cut into portable objects tools, ornaments, figurines, bones, antler, and mammoth ivory. They do not look dramatic at first. They can seem almost modest, like scratches made by a patient hand. Yet these marks may represent one of the most important thresholds before writing not language preserved, but meaning organized into conventional signs. In the caves of the Swabian Jura in southwestern Germany, Ice Age humans associated with the Aurignacian culture carve some of the oldest known figurative art in Europe. This is the world of ivory mammoths, horses, cave lions, birds, flutes, personal ornaments, and mysterious hybrid figures that seem to blend human and animal qualities. These objects are already astonishing because they show technical skill and imagination at a very early stage of Homo sapiens life in Europe. But on many of them, there is another layer of evidence-repeated marks that are not simply the shape of the animal or the tool itself. They are added signs, arranged on surfaces with care. The dates are deep, roughly between 43,000 and 34,000 years ago. This places them long after the earliest likely emergence of language in Homo sapiens, long after the possible foundations of symbolic thought, but still unimaginably before the first true writing systems of Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, or Mesoamerica. These marks are not writing in the full sense. They do not appear to encode spoken language in a way that can be read aloud. They do not form known words, syllables, or letters. No one can translate them, but they may show that Ice Age people were using repeated visual conventions on portable objects, and that is a major step between image, sign, memory, and structured communication. The difference between decoration and convention is subtle, and this is where the evidence becomes fascinating. A random scratch tells little. A beautiful pattern may be personal ornament or aesthetic design. But when certain kinds of signs appear repeatedly, when they are placed selectively on certain categories of objects, when dots, notches, lines, crosses, or star forms occur in structured ways across many artifacts, the possibility of convention grows stronger. Convention means that the sign is not only pleasing to one maker, it belongs to a shared habit. Others recognize it. Others may repeat it. The mark becomes part of a system, even if that system is not writing. Recent computational studies of these Aurignacian signs have tried to measure what the eye alone cannot easily judge. Instead of asking only what the signs mean, researchers ask how they behave as a system. How often do certain signs appear? Where do they appear? Are they distributed randomly? Or do they cluster on particular objects? Do their sequences show measurable structure? Do they carry a density of information comparable in any way to later sign systems? Such questions do not magically decipher the marks, but they make the evidence less impressionistic. The result is striking. The marks seem too patterned to be dismissed as casual decoration. Some sign types appear selectively, suggesting that their use may have been transmitted across generations. One example is especially revealing. Crosses may appear on tools and animal figures, but not on certain human figures. If that pattern holds across the evidence, it implies choice. The maker is not simply filling empty space with any mark that feels attractive. The mark belongs in some places and not others. That is the beginning of a grammar-like idea, though one must be careful with the word grammar. These signs do not prove syntax. They do not prove writing. They do not reveal sentences. But they may show rules of placement, expectation, and association. A sign attached to one kind of object and avoided on another begins to feel like a social code. The portable nature of these objects matters. Cave walls are fixed. A wall painting waits in one place, gathering meaning from return. A portable artifact moves with a person. It can be carried across camps, landscapes, and seasons. A marked figurine or tool can pass from one hand to another. Its signs travel. They may carry identity, memory, ownership, counting, ritual association, teaching, story, or some category of meaning no modern observer can recover. The evidence remains incomplete. And all specific interpretations remain uncertain, but portability changes the social life of the sign. It allows meaning to move with bodies. Some artifacts from the Swabian Jura also include musical instruments, especially flutes made from bird bone or mammoth ivory. This detail is easy to overlook, but it is remarkable. In the same broad cultural world that produces figurines and geometric signs, people are also making instruments capable of organized sound, music, image, sign, gesture, and speech may all be present in the same human atmosphere. We should not imagine them as separate inventions lined up neatly in time. They likely overlap. A marked object could be handled while stories are spoken. A flute could shape rhythm in a social gathering. A figurine could summon an animal, a being, a place, or a memory. A sign could help anchor what words alone might not hold. The hybrid figures are among the most mysterious. A small ivory object may show a form that modern eyes interpret as partly human and partly animal. Such figures are dangerous to explain too confidently. They may represent mythic beings, masks, transformations, spirits, hunting identities, social roles, or something entirely different. But the presence of geometric signs on or near such objects adds depth to the mystery. It suggests a world in which visual meaning is layered. A figure is not only a figure, a mark is not only a mark. The surface becomes a field where different kinds of meaning meet. This is why the phrase precursor to writing must be used carefully. True writing normally means a system of visible signs that represent spoken language. These ordination marks do not yet meet that definition. They are not the first alphabet, not the first cuneiform, not the first script. To call them writing outright would go beyond the evidence, but to dismiss them as meaningless is also too easy. They may belong to a much older category. Notational or conventional sign systems that help humans store and share information without yet transcribing speech. This category matters because writing did not appear from nothing. It emerged from older habits of marking, counting, remembering, identifying, and making signs socially stable. The connection to language is indirect, but powerful. Spoken language allows meaning to move through time by memory. A conventional sign allows meaning to attach to matter. When the two work together, human culture gains a new form of endurance. A person can speak about the mark, teach its use, correct its placement, recognize its category, and pass the convention onward. These signs, in turn, can remind later viewers of what the speech explained. In this way, language and material sign systems may reinforce each other long before writing exists. The voice gives the mark meaning. The mark helps the voice survive. Scholars still debate what these signs did, and no single explanation fully accounts for them. They may have served more than one purpose. Some could be aesthetic, others mnemonic, others linked to identity, counting, ritual, ownership, teaching, or stories. The same sign might carry different meanings in different contexts. A modern desire for one answer may be the wrong tool for an Ice Age world. What survives is not a dictionary, but a pattern of repeated intention. That may be enough to show that humans were already learning to make durable signs behave socially. By 43,000 to 34,000 years ago, then, The story has moved far from the first invisible words. It has entered a world where sound, image, object, body, and mark are all part of communication. The earliest known writing still lies tens of thousands of years ahead. Cities have not risen. Clay tablets have not been pressed by scribes, but on small pieces of ivory and bone in caves of Ice Age Europe. The human habit of meaning has become almost restless. It no longer stays only in breath. It scratches itself into matter, repeating, arranging, waiting for others to understand. By now the trail seems rich, ape calls that combine in meaningful ways, neural pathways that link sound and gesture, bodies capable of shaping breath, early humans living through the pressures of movement and cooperation, Homo sapiens carrying language deep in their shared inheritance, pigments and ornaments, ancient cave images, scenes that suggest storytelling, and conventional signs scratched into portable objects. The record appears to be filling with clues, and yet the central mystery remains almost untouched. No fossil solves the first word, no painting speaks its own explanation, no marked bone tells us whether it once stood for a number, a name, a memory, a rule, or a story. The closer one looks, the more clearly the problem comes into view. Language is everywhere implied, and almost nowhere directly preserved. This is the great frustration of studying language before history. The most important evidence is missing by its very nature. Speech is an event, not an object. It exists when air moves through a living body and reaches another living body prepared to understand it. Once the breath has passed, nothing remains unless someone turns that meaning into memory, image, mark, or later writing. Archaeology is extraordinarily good at finding durable things, but the daily life of language is not durable. The command to wait, the name of a river, the joke shared over food, the warning about a storm, the lesson about a stone edge, the story attached to a painted animal, all of it vanishes unless some material trace happens to be left behind. Even the traces that survive are ambiguous. A skull can show that a brain had a certain size and shape, but not whether the mind inside it used subordinate clauses or metaphor. A hyoid bone can suggest aspects of vocal anatomy, but not whether its owner told stories. A gene can influence neural development, speech, or motor control, but no gene is a grammar. A tool can show planning and learning, but not whether the teaching involved words, gestures, demonstration, or all of them together. A cave painting can reveal symbolic imagination, but not the language spoken in front of it. The evidence remains incomplete because each clue answers a different question from the one we most want to ask. One of the most famous examples of this difficulty involves genes associated with speech and language. Modern humans carry versions of genes that play roles in neural development and motor control, and certain mutations in living people can affect speech and language ability. It is tempting to treat such genes as keys to the origin of language, but the temptation must be resisted. Language is not located in one gene, and it did not appear because one molecular switch flipped from silence to speech. Genes shape development, brains, learning, and motor control across many systems. They create possibilities and constraints. They do not contain words. The first spoken meaning was not encoded like a message waiting inside DNA. Brain size presents a similar trap. Human brains are large compared with those of other apes, and brain expansion is unquestionably part of the broader story. But size alone does not explain language. Neanderthals had brains as large as, and sometimes larger than, those of living humans. yet the exact nature of their communication remains debated. Some animals with much smaller brains communicate in highly sophisticated ways within their own ecological worlds. What matters is not only size, but organization, connectivity, development, social learning, vocal control, memory, and the pressure to use these capacities in shared life. A big brain is not a sentence. A neural pathway is not a myth. The living system matters. Artifacts also mislead when they are treated too simply. A finely made tool may suggest planning, but planning does not automatically equal language. A repeated symbol may suggest convention, but convention does not automatically equal writing. A scene in a cave may suggest storytelling, but it cannot prove exactly what story was told. Archaeology works by inference, and inference must be disciplined. The strongest accounts build from patterns, not from single dramatic objects. They ask whether many lines of evidence point in the same direction: anatomy, genetics, tool complexity, symbolic behavior, social life, migration, and comparison with living primates. Even then, the answer remains probabilistic rather than absolute. This is why the phrase "the first human word" is both powerful and misleading. It gives the mystery a shape the mind can hold. One imagines a dawn, a small group, a sudden sound that means more than a call, and the world changing. But language probably did not begin as one isolated word spoken into a silent world. It more likely emerged from a dense web of vocal sounds, gestures, shared attention, imitation, emotional expression, rhythm, memory, and social convention. The first word may not have been recognizable as a word in the modern sense. It may have belonged to a system still halfway between signal and symbol, or perhaps many early words emerged in different groups and situations, stabilized, vanished, and changed beyond recognition long before any lineage led directly to us. There is another difficulty: language changes constantly. Even when writing exists, spoken languages shift across centuries. Sounds change, meanings drift. Grammars simplify in one place and grow complex in another. Words are borrowed, forgotten, softened, sharpened, transformed. Without writing, that change is even harder to track. The languages spoken 10,000 years ago are almost entirely beyond reconstruction, except in limited cases where later language families allow cautious comparison. The languages spoken 50,000 or 100,000 years ago are beyond direct recovery. They are not simply unknown, they are unrecoverable in detail. No method can rebuild their vocabulary from bones or pigment. Yet unrecoverable does not mean unimportant. The vanished languages of deep prehistory carried the first human maps of the world. They named animals that are extinct, coastlines that are drowned, rivers that have shifted, forests that no longer exist, and relationships that left no written record. They held ecological knowledge, kinship systems, jokes, grief, memory, and belief. They may have encoded migration routes, seasonal calendars, techniques for making tools and preparing foods, and stories that explained why a cave wall mattered. The loss is total, but the existence of such speech is not hard to imagine once the broader evidence is considered. What survives in the record suggests not mute survival, but worlds of meaning whose voices have been stripped away by time. The problem, then, is not that there is no evidence for ancient language. It is that the evidence is indirect, scattered, and resistant to certainty. Every clue must be placed beside others. Ancient DNA can show when populations separated, but not what they said. Rock art can show symbolic representation, but not spoken grammar. Conventional signs can show repeated visual meaning, but not full writing. Primate studies can reveal old communicative capacities, but not human language itself. Fossils can show anatomy, but not conversation. No single explanation fully accounts for the transition from primate communication to human speech, because the transition likely unfolded through many systems at once. This is where the mystery becomes more interesting than a simple answer would be. If one artifact proved the first word, the story would be clean and small. Instead, the silence forces a wider view. Language appears not as a single invention, but as a transformation of life bodies, brains, groups, tools, memories, landscapes, symbols, and voices gradually tightening into a new kind of human world. The first word is gone, but the conditions that made words powerful are written everywhere around its absence. So the investigation must continue without expecting the impossible. It cannot recover the exact sound that began human speech. It cannot identify the first speaker, the first sentence, or the first story. It can only trace the deepening shadows cast by language before writing the cooperative group, the taught tool, the marked body, the painted animal, the arranged scene, the repeated sign. These do not solve the mystery, they make it visible. They show where language must have been working, even when its breath has vanished. If the first word cannot be found, the next best question is how the road toward words may have been built. Scholars have proposed many routes, and the debate remains lively because each route explains part of the evidence while leaving something unresolved. Language is too large to have one simple cause. It is not only sound, not only thought, not only grammar, not only social bonding, not only tool-making, not only symbolic imagination. It is all of these at once, braided through bodies and communities over immense time. The origin of language may therefore be less like the discovery of fire and more like the slow formation of a river system, where many streams gather until, one day, a force exists that no single stream can explain. One major path begins with gesture. According to gesture-first ideas, the hands may have offered early hominins a more flexible way to communicate before vocal speech reached its later precision. Hands can point, imitate, measure, demonstrate, and shape meaning visibly. A gesture can be directed at a particular individual, adjusted if misunderstood, repeated if ignored, and combined with facial expression and gaze. This is powerful in a species already using hands for tools, food, touch, and social negotiation. A toolmaker can show an angle of strike better with the hand than with a cry. A traveller can point toward a ridge more clearly than call in its general direction. A hunter can signal silence or movement without sound. In this view, language begins as visible action, and speech later takes over because it can work in darkness, across distance, and while the hands are busy. But a purely gesture-first story has limits. Gesture depends on visibility. It works poorly when bodies are separated by trees, smoke, night, or terrain. It can be difficult when attention is elsewhere. Sound has advantages too ancient to ignore. Vocal calls are already central to primate life, and many animals use sound to maintain contact, warn of danger, attract attention, or coordinate movement. A vocal-first account argues that human speech grows from this deep acoustic inheritance, gradually gaining voluntary control, learned variation, and symbolic flexibility. The voice can reach where the hand cannot. It can call from behind, across brush, in darkness, or while carrying food or tools. It can hold a group together when bodies spread out. It can carry emotion with great speed. If gesture is precise, voice is persistent and far-reaching. the strongest view may not require choosing one winner. Language likely emerges from a multimodal system in which gesture, voice, face, gaze, rhythm, and posture work together. Even modern humans do not communicate by words alone. A spoken sentence changes meaning when paired with a smile, a stare, a pointed finger, a pause, or a lifted eyebrow. People gesture while speaking because thought itself seems partly motoric and spatial. Early communication may have been even more visibly mixed. The hand draws attention, the voice marks urgency, the face reveals intention, the body shows direction. Over time, sound becomes more language-like, but it never fully leaves gesture behind. The old system remains inside the new one. Another road leads through social bonding. Some researchers have argued that language may have developed partly as a way to manage larger and more complex social groups. Grooming is important in primate life. It reduces tension, builds trust, and maintains relationships. But grooming one individual at a time becomes inefficient if group size grows. Vocal communication, and eventually speech, could help maintain social bonds across more people at once. In this view, language is not born only from the need to describe tools or landscapes. It is born from the need to live together without falling apart. Talk becomes a kind of social glue. It allows people to track relationships, reputations, obligations, alliances, and conflicts. It lets a group know who can be trusted, who needs help, who has broken expectations, and who belongs. This idea explains something important about human speech. Much of it is social. People do not speak only to exchange survival facts. They greet, reassure, tease, complain, remember, explain motives, repair tension, praise, warn, and share attention. A great deal of human language is devoted to relationships. That may seem ordinary, but it may be one of the oldest functions of speech. A group that can talk about absent others has gained a powerful social instrument. It can coordinate beyond the immediate moment. It can create shared norms. It can make reputation travel faster than direct experience. Yet this explanation alone cannot account for the full structure of language. Social bonding may explain why speech became valuable, but not by itself how grammar, reference, and complex symbolic thought emerged. Toolmaking offers another path. Stone tools preserve sequences, and sequence is central to language. To make a complex tool, one must plan actions, hold steps in memory, control movement, and understand cause and effect. Some researchers see connections between the brain systems used for toolmaking and those used for language. Both require hierarchy, smaller actions arranged into larger patterns. Both require timing, correction, and the ability to imagine a result before it exists. A hand axe, a blade, or a composite tool is not a sentence, but it is an organized process. Teaching such processes could have placed strong pressure on communication. Words can mark steps, warn of errors, and help preserve techniques across generations. But toolmaking is not enough either. Some animals use tools without language. Early stone technologies can remain stable for long periods without showing the explosive flexibility associated with later human culture. A tool can show planning, but not necessarily narrative, metaphor, or grammar. The connection is real but indirect. Toolmaking may have trained and rewarded sequential thought, shared attention, and teaching, while language expanded those abilities into domains far beyond stone. No single explanation fully accounts for the leap from shaping a flake to telling a story about an absent ancestor or a journey not yet taken. Music and rhythm form another possible road. Human speech has melody, timing, stress, and pattern. Before words become precise carriers of meaning, vocalization may have helped synchronize emotion and group behavior. Rhythmic sound can calm, excite, coordinate, and make memory easier. It can join bodies together in time. Ancient flutes and later musical traditions show that organized sound is deeply human. Though music itself appears in the archaeological record long after language's likely beginnings, some theories suggest that speech and music may have grown from older forms of expressive vocal communication, where melody and emotional meaning came before fully referential words. Scholars still debate this, but the connection between rhythm, memory, and social bonding remains difficult to dismiss. Then there is the cognitive road, the growth of symbolic thought. Language requires more than making sounds. It requires the ability to let one thing stand for another. A sound can stand for an animal. A gesture can stand for an action. A mark can stand for a memory. A scene can stand for an event. Symbolic thought makes absence present. It lets the mind handle things that are not physically there. This ability appears indirectly in ornaments, pigments, art, burial practices in some contexts, and conventional signs. But symbolism also creates a puzzle. Did symbolic thought come first, allowing language to flourish, or did language itself help create richer symbolic thought by giving the mind more stable categories? The answer may be both. Words sharpen thought, and thought demands words. Genetics and brain evolution add yet another layer. Changes affecting neural development, vocal control, learning, hearing, and motor coordination must have contributed to the human capacity for language. But the modern view is not a single gene story. Language depends on large networks and long development in social environments. A child does not inherit a finished language. A child inherits a capacity to acquire one, if surrounded by speaking humans. That means biology and culture are inseparable. Genes shape the learner, community supplies the language, the learned language reshapes the brain. Across evolution, this feedback may have been powerful. Groups with richer communication could preserve more knowledge, creating new pressures for minds better able to learn and use that communication. All these roads meet in gradual change. Gesture contributes flexibility, voice contributes reach, social bonding contributes need, toolmaking contributes sequence and teaching, rhythm contributes memory and coordination, symbolic thought contributes reference, genetics and brain development contribute capacity, culture contributes transmission. The mystery is not which one invented language, but how they combined. The first human words likely arose when many older systems became tightly linked enough for meaning to become open-ended. From that moment, the world changed not because one sound was magical, but because sounds, gestures, memories, and signs could now be rearranged without limit. Language became a tool that could make more tools, a memory that could make more memories, and a story that could give birth to other stories. Long before history begins, language has already done its greatest work. It has carried human beings through landscapes that no map preserves. It has named rivers that have changed course, coastlines that now lie beneath the sea, animals that no longer walk the earth, and stars watched by people whose faces are gone beyond recovery. It has joined hands to memory, tools to teaching, images to stories, and communities to places. It has made the world shareable. And yet, when the written record finally opens, when clay tablets, carved signs, and early scripts begin to hold speech in visible form, language itself is already immeasurably old. Writing does not begin the human story. It arrives late, like a lamp brought into a room where people have been speaking in darkness for a very long time. That is the final paradox of the first human words. They are among the most important events in the making of humanity, and they are also among the least recoverable. No archive contains them. No museum can display them. No cave wall can repeat them. Their sound cannot be reconstructed from the shape of a handprint or the curve of a painted animal. The first word, if such a single beginning ever existed, died almost as soon as it was born, but its consequences did not die. They spread outward through every later human act that depends on shared meaning. A spoken warning becomes safer movement. A remembered route becomes migration. A teaching becomes technology. A story becomes identity. A name becomes belonging. A promise becomes a social bond. A mark becomes memory. A painting becomes a place where voices gather. By the end of the long prehistoric arc, the human world has become layered with meaning. A body can speak with breath, hands, face, posture, and gaze. A community can carry knowledge beyond the life of one person. A cave wall can hold an animal no longer present. A scene can suggest an event, a being, or a remembered encounter. A repeated sign can attach convention to matter. These things are not all the same as language, but they orbit the same center. They show minds that can make one thing stand for another, and they show communities that can recognize those meanings together. What survives in the record suggests not a sudden awakening, but a deepening continuity communication becoming symbol becoming memory, memory becoming culture. The old search for a first word may always remain unsatisfied because it asks for the one thing the past is least able to give. It asks air to become stone. It asks breath to become fossil. It asks a living exchange between bodies to survive after the bodies are gone. The wiser question may be different, not what was the first word, but what had to change before words could matter as they do. The answer lies across millions of years social primates already reading one another. Brains linking gesture and sound, bodies refining breath and movement, early humans relying on cooperation, Homo sapiens inheriting full linguistic capacity, groups turning speech into social power, and symbolic marks making meaning visible in pigment, shell, ivory, bone, and stone. No single explanation fully accounts for this transformation. Gesture alone is not enough. Voice alone is not enough. Tool-making, social bonding, rhythm, genetics, symbolic thought, and ecological pressure each explain part of the mystery, but none can stand alone. Language seems to arise from convergence. It grows where bodies, brains, hands, voices, memories, and communities begin to reinforce one another so strongly that meaning can become open-ended. Once that happens, humans are no longer limited to what is directly present. They can speak of the absent, the remembered, the imagined, the possible, and the forbidden. They can make worlds inside words. The earlier speakers did not know they were standing at the beginning of something. They were not inventing civilization in any conscious grand sense. They were solving the immediate problems of living where to go, what to eat, what to fear, whom to trust, how to teach, how to remember, how to belong. Yet from those practical needs came something immense. A group that can speak can inherit more than genes. It can inherit knowledge. It can inherit warnings. It can inherit techniques, songs, place names, rituals, humor, grief, and stories. It can carry the dead inside the living without needing monuments. It can build continuity from breath. This is why the earliest art and science feel so powerful. They are not valuable because they give us direct answers. They are valuable because they stand near the vanished voice. A hand stencil says someone was here. A painted animal says someone saw, remembered, and represented. A narrative scene says someone arranged beings in relation. A conventional mark says someone expected others to understand a repeated sign. These traces are the edges of a lost sound world. They do not let us hear prehistoric language, but they tell us that language was there, surrounding the act, giving the mark its place in human life. By the time writing appears, humans have already crossed an ocean of speech. The first scribes are not inventing meaning, they're fastening it to clay, stone, bone, wood, or fibre in new ways. They are doing, with visible signs, what human voices have done for untold generations, carrying memory beyond the moment. But writing changes the balance. It lets words travel without the speaker. It allows laws, accounts, myths, names, debts, offerings, and royal commands to persist outside the living body. It begins history in the narrow sense, the world of readable records. Yet before that, there is a far longer world, not empty and not primitive, but oral, symbolic, mobile, fragile, and almost entirely lost. The mystery of the first human words therefore ends without a recovered word. It ends with an echo. The echoes in every sign humans left before writing, every painted surface, every ornament, every repeated mark, every tool tradition passed down, every migration that required shared knowledge, every community that survived by turning experience into communication. It is also in every modern voice. When people speak today, they use capacities shaped by deep time breath turned into sound. Sound shaped into convention. Convention opened into thought. Thought offered to another mind. The first words are gone, but the human habit they began has never stopped. The cave grows quiet again. The fire is low. The painted wall no longer glows, and the hand on the stone returns to shadow. Outside, the landscape is no longer the one its makers knew. Rivers have moved, forests have retreated and returned, islands have changed shape, ice has advanced, melted, and left valleys open to wind. Animals once named with care have vanished from the living world. The people who knew those names are gone too, and every language they spoke has fallen out of hearing. Yet something remains, not the words themselves, but the need that made them, the need to call another closer, the need to warn, teach, comfort, remember, and explain, the need to make a place more than ground beneath the feet, the need to turn a dangerous world into a shared world. Before history, before writing, before any voice could be preserved by signs, humans lived inside that need. They carried it from camp to camp, through forests and across open country, beside coasts, rivers, caves, and firelight. Time erases almost everything. It erases accents, names, jokes, arguments, songs, and stories. It erases the exact sound of a mother tongue spoken by people who never imagined a future without it. But it does not erase the fact that they spoke. The proof is not a sentence. It is the shape of human life itself the tool taught, the mark repeated, the animal painted, the route remembered, the group held together by more than instinct. So the first human words remain where they have always been, just beyond the edge of evidence. They are not waiting to be found like a buried tool. They are waiting as a silence around every surviving trace. And perhaps that is fitting. Language begins as breath, and breath is not meant to stay. It moves from one body to another, changes the listener, and disappears. In the dark, The handprint still rests on the wall. It has no voice, but it does not feel empty. It is a sign of someone reaching across time without knowing it, leaving behind the outline of a living hand, while the words spoken nearby drift away into the long, unrecorded night.